Good afternoon. My name is Susan Reardon. I'm the Staff Hearing Officer, and I'd like to call to order the Staff Hearing Officer meeting of Wednesday, June 4th. And today we have 3 items on our agenda. We did send out a public notice for an item at 2120 Grand Avenue, and it was noticed. However, it's been continued indefinitely. And so if you're here for that item, we will re-notice when a new date has been set. Is there any other changes to the agenda today? No? Is there any announcements or appeals? No. Is there any general comments from the members in the audience on items not on our agenda today? No? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to the first item, which is 724 Las Canoas Road. If the applicant wants to come up and sit down.
Las Canoas Place.
Oh, place. Okay, sorry. Oh, okay. Mr. Teeter?
This project is 724 Las Canoas Place. It's a 2.5-acre site located in Hillside Design District. And the proposed building site actually is, like I said, 2.5 acres, and it has about 2,500 square feet of living area and a 479 square foot existing barn. The proposed project garage. The proposed project actually includes a new accessory structure, which is a barn, which is 957 square feet, in addition to the existing garage, about 59 square feet, and a second story over the garage, which will be about 570 square feet. There's also going to be a lap pool, and they are changing out some of the exterior windows and doors. The modification before you today is to allow for accessory structures, detached accessory structures over 500 square feet. This project was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board. They generally had favorable comments. They felt that the modification request was reasonable given the size of the lot, that the accessory space was appropriate for the lot size. Staff also supports that reasoning because we feel it meets the intent and purpose of the ordinance. Normally, we limit the size of accessory spaces in single-family residence zoned properties because we don't want to see too much accessory structure on any given site. But given the size of the lot, we feel that that's an appropriate request, and we do support the modification. Any question?
No, not at this time. You'd like to state your name for the record, and if you have any additional comments?
I'm Rod Britton, architect for Dennis Chevelle.
I'm Dennis Chevelle.
The owner.
Okay.
The owner.
Okay, and you have no additional comments?
No, we just like this approved, that's all.
Okay. Well, I read the staff report, and I went out to the site yesterday and looked at the surrounding neighborhood and where the area of the proposed barn is, and I agree with staff's recommendation that the site is a large site, and there's adequate area there to support larger buildings, and so with that, I would approve your... You need to open a public comment.
That's good. And I have a comment too.
Okay. Actually, I need to open a public hearing before.
Okay.
I can do that. Is there anybody here who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 724 Las Canoas Place? Seeing no one, I close the public hearing. I would like to note that I did receive a letter in opposition to the project from Ms. Paula Westbury. She monitors the different review boards and commissions of the city and routinely provides comments on them. And I think you were provided a copy of the one?
No, received it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Does she live in the neighborhood?
No. Mr. Carter?
I had a question. She didn't live in the neighborhood. No, she doesn't live in the neighborhood.
No, she lives...
Get that on the record.
Yeah.
She's a person who follows a lot of the planning processes throughout the city and comments on well, all of them now. I had a question, and I'm part of the staff. I'm sorry that we didn't ask this before. It kept slipping my mind. It's shown as a barn, and when you look at the floor plan, it looks like, stables and things like that. But there is no fencing for horses or anything like that.
We don't have fence less than 6 feet, so we don't have to show it. We're going to get the barn on there first, then we'll corral over.
I see.
Corral fence later on.
So there will be a corral
Right.
between the barn and the swimming pool and all that stuff. It's just without
For
being
sure.
shown. It's
Well, that's a good question, but we plan to put up a test.
Yeah, we went through that with on the same family.
AVL.
thanks.
Now, additional question in regards to that, is there a separation for the corral area from the property line, or is it from adjacent residential uses?
It's from adjacent residential
35
uses.
feet.
Yeah.
Okay, and you have adequate.
We can go right to our property fence, as a matter of fact. They're more than 35 feet away.
Okay. Any other comments? No. Betsy? Okay. So, like I was saying, the site is more than adequate to have the increased space. So, therefore, I approve the project, making the finding that the modifications necessary to approve or to secure an appropriate improvement on the site and meets the purpose and intent of the ordinance by providing an amount of accessory space that is in proportion with the lot area. And as the staff recommended, I am putting the condition on that a zoning declaration or zoning compliance declaration be recorded so that this isn't used as it's not approved as an additional dwelling unit.
Oh, certainly.
Okay. And this action is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 days by an interested party or yourself. And also the Planning Commission has oversight authority on projects reviewed by the staff hearing officer. So if they were to review this project and it had some concerns or issues, they could call it up and have a hearing, call it up within that same 10-day appeal period. Okay?
Is that the ABR? Or
No, the Planning Commission.
Planning Commission?
Yeah.
And what would you like me to do with this?
You can keep it.
Okay.
I like to read it. And just for the record, so I the notice to the sound is Dennis and Susan Chevelle Clark, and our name is Dennis and Susan Chevelle. Clark. So just for the record, so we know.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is 1732 Santa Barbara Street. If you'd like to give the staff presentation.
Project site is 1732 Santa Barbara Street. It's located on the corner of Santa Barbara Street and Islay, and the site is about 19,884 square feet with a 4,603 square foot single-family residence with no other accessory structures or garage on site. The project before you is for modification to allow the new two-car garage and the accessory structure. This is going to be a 500 square foot garage and 160 square foot accessory structure to be located within the interior rear yard and within the open yard area. The occupants currently park on a concrete slab that's located adjacent to the house. And as I mentioned, there is no garage or accessory structures because the house was built early 1900s. There was a separate carriage house, we believe, that was sold off in 1920s, and so therefore, consequently, there are no accessory structures on site. So the applicant obviously wants to provide for covered parking, as would bring it into compliance with the current zoning ordinance, which requires 2 covered parking spaces, which we do support. This project was reviewed by HLC because the house, it was landmarked in 2007, so it is considered HLC thinks it's a wonderful house, and they like the project, they like the location for 2 reasons. They believe that the garage should be subservient to the house, given the nature of the architectural style of the property, and also because by placing the garage and the accessory structure in the rear and within the open yard, they're preserving 2 existing large oak trees, which we think is a benefit to the property. The HLC did support this. We also support it. We think it's a good location. I know even though it will not meet the current ordinance open yard requirements, we had discussed this, that there's a pending ordinance amendment that will allow for a variation in the, for secondary front yards, which this is a secondary front yard over here, which will allow for a reduced number, I think it's 10 feet, allowing for a greater area to be considered the open yard. And if the ordinance was in effect today, they would actually exceed the open yard requirement under the ordinance. So given that, and given the nature that the front yard is fairly large, even though front yards are not considered open yard, they have a nice outdoor living area here, covered porch, which conceivably is used by the occupant. Also, they have a nice open area here, a deck, and there's a play area over here for the children. So, given that, we think that the location is appropriate and the modification request is reasonable, and there really isn't a better place to locate the garage, but I'm going to allow Jake Jacobus, he's the city historian, maybe to discuss this a little bit more and talk about why HLC supports the location.
Well, you pretty much stole my thunder. That was a really good presentation. It's a fairly large lot, but the house is absolutely enormous, and so you come to this situation where trying to define open space becomes a little bit difficult. But the HLC felt, and staff agrees, that the front porch is larger in square footage than many houses that people are living in. You do have that courtyard area in between the two wings that project off the rear of the building. And there's plenty of lawn area on the side yard that children can play or whatever. The location of the original carriage house was likely on the southeast side of the property where the driveway to the adjacent residence runs. This property was split at one point, made into two lots. It still exists, actually. So the development pattern for a building of this age would be that the carriage house would have been placed as far to the rear of the site as possible. Generally, you didn't want the carriage house activities to necessarily be visible to your neighbors or to yourself. So the location is the HLC supports it, and I support it as the city's urban historian.
Now, Jake, did the HLC look at alternative places for the garage, maybe up closer towards the street in this area to preserve the open, or they just reviewed the project?
No, it was discussed, the idea of, there were several things that could have happened here. One would be that there's as Betsy pointed out, there's a 20-foot by 20-foot approximately concrete pad right at the property line. And on the upper east side, you do occasionally see instances where garages were built integrated right into the stone walls. But generally that was done because the sites had some sort of topography that made it difficult to get to the rear, and so it was more plausible to put the garage in the front. Also, those were generally done on structures that were built later. This is a 1904 structure, it's a very early structure, and they would have still had a carriage and horses and that type of thing, and not likely had motor cars as of yet. So the carriage house would have been to the back. If you put it in the middle somewhere, two things happen. If you were to say, okay, well, we'll compromise, we'll put it in here. There's a nice vista that comes across through here from the house. There's a rather impressive stairway with a large window that you can overlook through here. Plus, there's a courtyard in here that's usable space. And if you were to block that with the garage, you kind of shorten the view access of that part of the property. Also, you would start to impact these two oak. These are 12-inch diameter oak trees, which with its current location will be perfectly preserved.
In tandem for both of you two is the proposed garage doors. They're not our typical garage doors, and I could understand trying to match, the character of the house. But how do we feel about those types of garage doors?
I discussed this with our transportation department, and they are concerned about the garage doors, and I wanted Jake to address this because of the historical nature of the house. They do not normally approve for manual doors. They believe that it encourages people not to use it as a garage. They want the remote controlled, and I don't know if that's feasible.
These will actually be motorized.
Yeah.
Oh, they will be?
Oh, yeah, they'll be motorized.
Right.
It's just that the classic roll-up kind with the classical motor, roll-up doors would look really out of place. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to get out of the car and open those doors any more than you guys want me to not use the garage. So yeah, the intention is to have a motor on that. Oh yeah, sure, sorry. Yeah.
Your name for the record.
Brian Gregory, I'm the owner. Christopher DeRose is my architect.
Yes, I'm the designer of the project. And yes, actually the width I've researched operators.
Okay, yeah. Staff and the HLC supports the idea of the carriage house doors. The reason being that, of course, I know that transportation doesn't normally like that type of door. Part of the reason is it would normally swing into usable driveway space, but this is quite a long driveway. They're quite far back from the street. They are the appropriate door that would have been on a carriage house associated with this period of architecture. If you put a roll-up door that has the look of a carriage door, it never quite pulls it off. They always look kind of tacked on. So it's rare when we get an applicant that has the ability to and is willing to spend the extra money. These are very expensive. This is not an economical solution by any means. So it's very rare that we get an applicant that's willing to do what I consider, the full Monty right thing, which is to put these carriage house doors on. This house has been remarkably restored. Mr. Gregory, fortunately I had the chance to tour it, and it's just not to be believed inside. And he's carried that same quality of architecture back to this new garage, and for that reason I would strongly support the carriage house doors for the more authentic look and operation. And they can, again, like Mr. Gregory said, they can be electrified. There's nothing that says they can't be motorized.
Thank you. My other question for you, Betsy, was this proposed hammerhead turnaround. Is it required?
Again, I checked with transportation, and while they have no objection to the turnaround, it is feasible to back out of the property, and they aren't concerned because Islay is not a heavily traveled street. They'd be more concerned about Santa Barbara Street. What they would prefer, in order not to encourage this to be used as a parking space, is to have this reduced slightly so that you can still use it as a turnaround, but some type of solution here to close part of it off so that it won't be used as parking.
Okay.
They also express concern about, I understand this portion of the driveway will be paved, but the gravel driveway. Now, I did not know if there was a historical element to that choice, or is economics, or...
Guidance is definitely appreciated on that. There's many schools of thought that prevail in urban planning of what driveways should be. Should they be water permeable or not? And there's also the historical aspect. Should they be cement, asphalt? Asphalt really wasn't invented. So it would either have to be, just from a historical aspect, wouldn't you agree it'd either be cement or a permeable surface like gravel?
As a carriage house, it would have likely been a permeable surface like gravel. At some point, when the house aged, when we were using automobiles, then it likely would have got paved in concrete. When you look at the bungalow era houses, about 1915 to the 1920s, they had those concrete ribbon driveways.
Right, yeah.
And so you were accommodating the automobile. At this point, because we're trying to go for that carriage house look, gravel would not be an inappropriate material. Plus, given that there's, between the gate and the street, there's a fair amount of concrete for any loose gravel to come off the tires before they get to the... Right. Because I know that might be one concern that somebody might have that the gravel ends up getting into the street.
That's exactly their primary concern. But they did leave the option open, given the historical nature of the house. If you consider that to be appropriate, then the transportation is...
given the fact that it's to the rear, we're trying to go back to the carriage house look, I would say it's an appropriate surface. What we don't want to see, a lot of people think that, they get these interlocking pavers because they look somewhat traditional. People think that, oh man, I'm really restoring my house with these interlocking pavers. They didn't exist. So this is actually an authentic material that would have been found. Plus, it gives you the added benefit with those big trees of getting more water to the root system and less impact on the roots of the trees.
Right. That's the other consideration.
Mr. Cutty, did you have
I had a question for Mr. Jacobus as well. One of the, although we do support this project, one of our concerns is the addition of accessory space in the setback. We don't normally support that, but in this case, it seemed like it was part of the architecture of the whole structure. It seemed like to cut that off would change that structure quite a bit, and I don't know if the Historic Landmarks Commission talked about that and how that might affect things, because although we do support We normally support garages in the setbacks, especially for a situation like this. It's not quite so normal.
Yeah, carriage houses would typically have, for a larger building like this, would typically have a tack room, which, pardon the pun, would be tacked onto the side of the carriage house. And in order to get some more of that space, in order to get more of that space out there, you would end up with a funny jog in your building. The building's it's meant to be, a simple rectangular building, and if you start to try and pull this back to here, you start to take a bite out of it. And I'm not sure you really gain that much benefit in terms of relieving the setback as you would the impact that it might have on the look of the building or what you've got to do to the roof in order to take that bite out. Again, it does meet this setback on this side. It's just this area we're talking about in here. And in order to be consistent with the architecture and to keep the simple rectangular form of the carriage house, I would recommend that we allow it. But I realize that that's up for you all.
Can I add a clarification?
Okay, let me ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to
Sure. Okay.
Then my last one was regarding this hedge, fence, sandstone, wall combination. On the plans, it's indicated that's going to be trimmed to a maximum of 3.5 feet. Is that one of your recommended conditions then?
Because it was noted on the plans, in fact, I did talk to the architect about this, and I didn't require it as condition because it's noted on the plans that they are going to do that. We discussed that because it is a front yard. So they were agreeable to that. So, but we certainly can add that as condition if
Okay, now if you want to give
Oh,
add
sure.
anything.
I just wanted to clarify kind of a situational issue around having tool and bicycle space. Right now, the real only space like that exists is in the basement of the house. And because of that, nothing actually goes in the basement. All the bikes and all of our lawn tools just simply sit outside. And that's not good. And more often than not, for convenience, they end up sitting in the courtyard, and then we end up looking out at them. And it's too much trouble to get stuff up and down these steps. They're very steep, and then there's a jog at the end, and then another jog to get into the basement. So it's just nice to keep that relatively mobile, the bicycles, and the relatively dirty and outdoorsy stuff in an accessory outbuilding.
Yeah, and as far as the massing goes, being the designer on the project, I just want to stress the importance of the form of the house. A lot of times when you're looking at a diagram like this, it's hard to get an appreciation of what's going on in the third dimension, but I don't know if I have a good photograph of it. These two one-story wings that come off, you can kind of tell by the diagram of the hip roof here. They have this form that's the hip roof, which I'm showing on this roof plan as well. And I think it's maybe helpful if I pull out an elevation. But yeah, as far as chopping off and pulling the accessory part up, I really felt that it was important in order for this to look like it was conceived at the same time that the building was, to have this form, even to the point where if we just had a two garage without this part, the roof would be closer and the hip would start sooner. Doesn't quite have the feeling that these two wings do. So that was one of the things I concentrated on, trying to have this piece relate to those other two pieces, even though it's out of view. So the form was very important in trying to get this roof to pick up the roof of those other two buildings.
Is there any openings in the back here?
No.
Windows or doors? Or?
In the back, no, there's another drawing that shows the back side of that, but no, there's no openings on either of these two sides. There's a window here.
There's a window here. Yeah.
There are some other elevations of that, but they're probably underneath the sheet if you'd like to look at them.
Yeah, I looked at the
Yeah, you put it in. Okay.
Okay, do you have any other comments?
No, unless you have questions for us.
Okay, well, first I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on 1732 Santa Barbara Street? No, seeing no one, I will close the public hearing.
I did want to note we received 12 letters in support of the project, and then we received one letter in opposition, and it was from Paula Westbury again. Did you receive a copy of it?
It's pretty traditional to receive a letter from her, so I can guess what it says.
Okay. All right. Well, my comments or concerns are a little different than staff's. I don't have necessarily a problem with it encroaching into the interior yard setback. The larger problem I have is using this large area of open area, currently open now, taken up with building and paving. I like the fact that there's gravel. The part I'm struggling with is losing an area that is open area to this much development, and that's my questions related to why can't it be pushed up closer to the street, not necessarily on the street, but closer to the street, so you still have a larger area in the back. And that's what I'm struggling with.
Well, okay, can I answer to that?
Sure.
Okay. One of the things is this line right here is the setback, the front yard setback. So, and that's 30 feet. So right up to here and here. So if you put the building partially into that, it requires a mod.
Right.
And so if you try to obey that and you put it here, you would have that problem that Jake talked about where it just kind of blocks this. Really what it would do is, if it was right in here so that we didn't need a mod there, it really does a bad thing because you have a little bit of yard here which is barely usable, then you have a building, and then you have a little bit more yard that is barely usable. But this still makes this whole area quite usable. So,
Which is typically where we hang out, as it is. This, right now, this is ivy and we don't really use the space, so the idiom of where we use our space is typically up here.
There's a bigger issue. Can I comment on that?
Yes, there's two.
This is a designated city landmark for the house, and so the idea would be not to necessarily have a negative impact on the historic resource, which we could possibly start doing. If we start bringing the garage closer to the street, we're introducing a new element that could potentially block views of the house or be considered to have a negative impact on the house. And we may even, if we decide to move it forward closer to the street, we may even have to ask for an addendum to an historic structures report to make a finding as to that it wouldn't have a negative impact.
what I had planned on doing is, I thought, like maintaining these two piers out here, and then letting the eye look back to another set of gates here. It kind of somewhat maintains part of the ambience that's there now. And I think most of these scenarios, when you put the building up close, not only destroys a lot of the architectural integrity of the historical building, but it causes issues of, like Jake was saying, of building close to the sidewalk and blocking different areas. And there's, from the point of view of being an occupant inside here, there's wonderful views of the mountains there. So I purposely tried to get the building to be a few feet back from this. That's kind of one of the reasons we're asking for it to push back there.
Right, the view from the kitchen window, this is the kitchen, where we spend a lot of our time. This is all pretty much all windows here. You look out these windows up at the hills, which are right over here. If there's a garage here, you still see it, but I think this represents a good solution for positioning, sensitivity to the historical structure, and kind of not having a lot of stuff in your personal space. You know what I mean?
Did you have anything to add? Did you have anything to add?
I do have something to add. Because you're concerned about open yard, right? And like Ms. Teeter said, we do have hopefully impending ordinance amendment which would change how we calculate open yard. And if that was in place, right now they have about 730. But if you really took what would be allowed under the proposed ordinance, it'd be about 2,000, maybe even more than that, square feet, because you would follow the line of the garage and the driveway down to the 10-foot line, take it all the way back to the building, and then take the deck and go straight back up like you are, and then and then go back in. So it's quite a large area. 1250 is what's required, and due to a quirk of the way that this house is laid out, with the top part, that top wing being slightly longer than the wing that's close to the street, they don't get to count that courtyard. So, that's how we as staff got to supporting the open yard modification. And it does meet the 20-foot dimension. It's, it's more a locational problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I still have those concerns, but I agree with Danny. I actually am working on those amendments that are redefining the areas where you can have your open yard area. We define the primary front yard and the secondary front yard, and this definitely is your primary front yard, and this is your secondary front yard. And you do have a lot of open areas to recreate in. You have this 713 square foot area. You have this 675 square foot deck area. You have another 415. That's just informal areas, as well as this open lawn area. And I think, given that I still have the concerns of taking up the open yard area. I like the idea of gravel. I will leave that up to the HLC to decide the appropriateness. If it's not gravel, some other kind of permeable paving or something that keeps it more open. My other concern is with this hammerhead. We don't allow parking within the interior yard setback, and to me it looks like a parking space here because you can back out. So I would request that it be pulled back and not deep enough to be able to support
Park the car in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then with the hedge sandstone wall fence type thing, it would need to be reduced down for a total height. Total height of 3.5 feet. So I guess what I'm saying is that I can approve the project and make the findings that the modification is necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the property and meets the purpose and intent of the ordinance, because there are no feasible alternatives to the proposed location that would preserve the architectural integrity of the house while protecting the existing trees. And I would make it subject to the conditions that I just spoke about, that the hedge fence and sandstone wall combination be reduced to 3.5 feet in height, that the size of the hammerhead turnaround be reduced so it's not used as parking.
Okay.
Another condition you guys said was part of the project, although it's not in the project description, is that the doors would be motorized. And so I'd like to see those motorized.
Okay.
And then I say the permeable paving as a condition, Kathy, or no? So I'm fine with the gravel, but if the gravel's not there, some kind of permeable paving. I think those were the items I discussed, right?
Yes. Mr. Aaron, if I could add something on that hammerhead, I would suggest that it be limited to at least 10 feet away from the property line, so it doesn't encroach into the setback. I think that would satisfy our concerns as staff.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And with that, you have a approved project, and it is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 days. And
Okay.
like I said in the previous project, the Planning Commission also has an oversight authority, so if they were to review the project and have concerns with it, they could call it up within that same 10-day appeal period. But they wouldn't hold the hearing within that 10 days. They just call it up, you'd be notified, and then we'd set a date
Okay.
for a hearing.
Sure.
Okay?
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for your time and
Yes.
information.
Thank you.
Next step.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Hey, Susie. So the next item is 85 North Lacumbra Road.
We're keeping Paula busy, huh?
Allison?
Thank you. This is a request for an extension of a tentative map that was approved for a 9-unit condominium development. The address is 85 North Lacundra. The tentative map is scheduled to expire on July 25th of this year, and the applicants are requesting a 3-year time extension. Staff does support the extension request, and I can answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
I don't have any questions right now of you. I take it you're the applicant. Would you like to state your name for the record, and you have anything else to add?
Trish Allen with Susanna Elledge, Planning and Permitting.
And Pete Richards. I'm with Y Road Properties.
Okay.
I actually don't. I'm here for questions. So we're set to expire, and we need some more time to process the recordation of the map.
Okay.
I have one comment in your the staff report. I think you have a typo in the third line where it says the appeal was heard on July 25th, 2005. I think that was 06.
Correct. Okay. There's no public hearing required for this, so I don't have to worry about remembering to open it. I read the staff report. I didn't visit the site since it's a time extension. Their conditions haven't changed. We haven't done any major zoning ordinance amendments or general plan amendments that would affect the project consistency with the general plan or the zoning ordinance. So I agree with the staff report that the project continues to conform to the city zoning and building ordinances and policies of the general plan, and I approve your request for a 3-year time extension. Subject to the original conditions of approval in Exhibit A. And in the instance of a time extension, only denials are appealable to the City Council. So my action to extend it is not appealable.
Good to know.
Good. We won't appeal it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and with that, that concludes the meeting of the staff hearing officer. Thanks.
Thank you.
Use your glasses.